The year is 682 AD. In the jungle city of Palenque, deep in what we now call southern Mexico, a woman sits on a throne carved from a single block of jade. The stone is cold against her skin, polished smooth by decades of ritual. Around her, copal incense burns in ceramic censers, filling the chamber with smoke so thick it blurs the edges of reality. Her name is Lady Cable, but the people whisper another name for her, one they dare not speak above a whisper. Kalumte, Supreme Warrior Queen. But that's not why they whisper. They whisper because of what she does in the dark hours before dawn, what she's about to do right now, while the city sleeps and the jungle holds its breath. She's 41 years old. By Maya standards, ancient. Most women her age are grandmothers, tending cooking fires and weaving cotton on backstrap looms, their hands worn smooth from decades of domestic labour. Their bodies bear the scars of childbirth, of carrying water, of grinding corn on stone matarts until their knees give out. But Lady Cable has outlived 3 husbands, 2 rival queens, and more assassination attempts than the priest can count. Her hands, heavy with jade rings that clink softly when she moves, rest on the armrests of her throne. Each ring represents a conquered city, a defeated enemy, a political alliance sealed in blood and marriage. Those hands have signed death warrants. Those hands have held the obsidian blade that took enemy hearts from still living chests. But those hands have done other things too. Things that leave scars you can't see. Things the Spanish conquistadors would later find so disturbing, so incomprehensible, so outside their European framework of reality, that they burned every record they could find. Almost every record. Because what the Maya practiced in their temples, what their rulers did in the name of the gods, wasn't just religion. It wasn't just sacrifice in the way we understand it. A life given, a death accepted, a transaction between human and divine. It was something far more calculated, something far more intimate, something that blurred the line between worship and violation, between devotion and destruction, between the sacred and the sexual so completely that even today, archaeologists struggle to speak about it in academic papers. They use words like ritual bloodletting and auto-sacrifice and penitential practice, clean words, safe words, words that hide what actually happened in those temple chambers when the torches burned low and the priestesses began to chant. The question isn't whether you can handle what Lady Cable did, it's whether you're ready to understand why an entire civilization, brilliant astronomers, mathematical geniuses, architectural masters, believed it was necessary. Here on Crimson Historians, we dig into the archives the world forgot. The codices the Catholic Church tried to burn, the murals they plastered over with lime, the testimonies that were too disturbing, too savage, too incomprehensible for textbooks and museum placards. If you've ever wondered why certain practices vanish from history while others are told again and again, you're in the right place. Why some truth gets sanitized into footnotes while others become legends. Every view, every subscription helps us pull one more voice, one more truth, one more uncomfortable reality out of the darkness where powerful institutions preferred to bury it. Now let's go back to that throne room, because Lady Cable is about to perform a ritual that will echo through centuries, that will leave marks on her skeleton that archaeologists will find 300 years later, that will force us to confront what devotion really costs. And to understand what she's about to do, you need to understand the machine that created her. The Maya didn't just build pyramids, they built a civilization that lasted 3,000 years. Longer than Rome, longer than any European empire, longer than Christianity has existed. And they did it in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, dense jungle, where rain comes in walls of water that can drown a city in hours, where the sun burns like divine punishment, where jaguars hunt in the darkness and venomous snakes hide in every shadow. They built cities that held 100,000 people in places where modern cities struggle to survive. They calculated the movements of Venus with accuracy that wouldn't be matched by Europeans for another 1,000 years. They understood the concept of zero before most of the world had even figured out how to count reliably. But here's what your history teacher never mentioned, what the museum tours skip over, what the documentaries about mysterious Maya conveniently ignore. The Maya believed the universe was collapsing. Constantly, every single day. This wasn't metaphor. This wasn't poetry. This was fundamental cosmological truth in their worldview. The sun might not rise tomorrow. The rain might never come again. The thin membrane between the living world and Xibalba, the underworld of torture and darkness, could tear at any moment, spilling demons and death into the realm of the living. The universe was not stable, it was not self-sustaining. It was a fragile thing, held together only by constant effort, constant vigilance, constant sacrifice. And the glue that held it together was blood, not metaphorical blood, not symbolic sacrifice, not prayers or good intentions or moral behaviour. Real human blood, flowing in very specific ways at very specific times, from very specific body parts, offered to very specific gods who are always hungry, always demanding, always one missed ritual away from letting everything collapse into chaos. The Maya had perfected something that makes modern people deeply uncomfortable, something that challenges our neat categories of religion and sexuality, of worship and violence, of choice and coercion. They had weaponized human sexuality in service of cosmic survival. And their rulers especially, their female rulers were the primary weapons. Lady Cable wasn't just a queen, she wasn't just a consort warming the throne until her husband came back from war. She was a Kalumte, a title that appears only 7 times in all Maya inscriptions spanning 3,000 years of history. It means supreme warrior, but the warfare she waged wasn't just on neighbouring kingdoms, wasn't just the standard political manoeuvring and territorial expansion. It was on her own body. The inscriptions are clear about this once you know how to read them. The glyphs don't lie, even when Spanish friars burn the books that explain them. Stone remembers what paper forgets. Lady Cable ruled the city of El Peruwaka, a strategic crossroads between rival kingdoms. Her marriage to King Kinich Bahlam was political, designed to cement an alliance between 2 powerful dynasties. But within 5 years of the marriage, her name appears larger than his on monuments. Her titles multiply, her authority expands. By 692 AD, she's signing off on military campaigns. She's receiving tribute from conquered cities. She's performing rituals that only the highest-ranking nobles could perform. And every 20 days, according to the Maya calendar cycle, she was performing another ritual, one that left its mark on her bones. In 1946, archaeologist Tatiana Proskuryakov deciphered a glyph that had puzzled scholars for decades. It appeared on monuments showing royal women in positions that seemed unusual, intimate. The women were always alone or surrounded only by female attendants. They were always in private chambers, and they were always holding something. The glyph translated roughly to, "She performed the letting." The letting of what? For years, scholars assumed it meant tongue piercing. That was common enough. Rulers would draw thorned ropes through holes pierced in their tongues, letting blood drip onto sacred bark paper. Painful, but comprehensible. Noble even. A ruler suffering for their people. But the positions of the women in the carvings didn't match tongue piercing. The posture was wrong. The attendants were positioned differently, and the implements they held were too large, too elaborate. Then in the 1970s, scholars gained access to Spanish colonial records that had been sealed in Vatican archives. The Spanish friar Diego de Landa had witnessed Maya practices in the Yucatan in the 1560s, centuries after Lady Carball, but in the same unbroken tradition. He wrote an account of what he saw that was so disturbing, so graphic, so incomprehensible to European Christian sensibilities that the Church sealed it away for 300 years. He described how Maya noblewomen would gather in private temple chambers at specific times in the ritual calendar. They would be surrounded by priestesses and older noblewomen who had performed the rite themselves. Burning copal incense would fill the room. Ceramic censers shaped like gods would flank the chamber. The women would prepare themselves with herbal mixtures. Modern chemical analysis of residues found in ceremonial vessels suggests psychoactive compounds, possibly derived from water lilies and wild tobacco, mixed with tree bark that contained natural anaesthetics. Then they would take a rope, not just any rope, a rope woven specifically for this purpose, prepared by specialised weavers, whose only job was to create implements of sacred suffering. A rope braided from cotton fibres, embedded with thorns from specific plants, stingray spines imported from the coast, obsidian blades knapped to surgical sharpness, each one blessed by priests. The rope could be 3 feet long, sometimes longer, and they would draw this rope through their genitals, slowly, methodically, while priestesses chanted prayers to Ixchel, the goddess of childbirth, and weaving, and the moon, while musicians played bone flutes and turtle shell drums, while the smoke from the censers grew so thick the women could barely see. De Landa wrote, and I'm translating from his 16th century Spanish, "I saw things that made me question whether these were women or demons clothed in human flesh. They smiled while they bled. Some even laughed, though their legs trembled so violently they could not stand without support from the attendants. The amount of blood was extraordinary. It soaked through multiple layers of cloth and pooled on the stone floor. Yet they continued, drawing the rope through again and again until I had to leave the chamber lest I vomit from the sight. The blood would soak cloth papers stacked beneath them, dozens of sheets of bark paper, specially prepared to absorb maximum blood. These papers would be burned in ceramic censers. The smoke would rise through ventilation shafts designed into the temple architecture. The smoke would carry the blood to the gods. And the gods, sated, would allow the sun to rise again, would allow the rain to fall, would hold the universe together for another ritual cycle. But here's what breaks your heart. What makes this more than just a disturbing historical footnote. Lady Carball performed this ritual every 20 days, for 40 years. We know this because in 2012, archaeologists excavating Temple Third in Palenque found a burial chamber that had been sealed for 1,300 years. The tomb had been looted once in antiquity, probably within decades of the burial, but the thieves had taken only portable jade and left the skeleton untouched. Inside was a woman in her 60s, buried with more jade than any Maya royal ever discovered. More than 1,000 pieces. Jade beads, jade pendants, a jade mask with shell and obsidian inlay for the eyes, jade rings on every finger. The initial announcement focused on the jade. Museums celebrated the find. National Geographic did a spread. The jade went on tour. But the physical anthropologists examining the skeleton found something that made them pause their analysis for 3 days while they consulted with medical ethicists about whether to publish their findings. The skeletal remains showed extensive scarring on the pelvic bone, not the kind of damage from childbirth that leaves different marks, not from disease or injury. This was damage consistent with repeated, severe trauma to the genital area over decades. Scar tissue had calcified. Bone had remodelled in response to chronic injury. The isotope analysis of her teeth matched royal lineage from the Palenque dynasty. The jade matched descriptions from inscriptions about Lady Cable. The carbon dating matched her known reign period from historical records, and carved into the chamber wall in glyphs so precise they seemed to glow in the archaeologist's flashlights was her full title, Kalumte Cable, Supreme Warrior Cable. But there was something else in that tomb, something the looters hadn't taken because they didn't understand its value. Bundles of thorned rope, dozens of them, carefully preserved, wrapped in bark cloth that had somehow survived the centuries, arranged around her body like offerings, or like weapons, like the instruments of her true warfare. Each rope was different. Some had small thorns, others large. Some had obsidian blades, others stingray spines. They ranged in length from 18 inches to over 4 feet. A lifetime of implements, an arsenal of suffering, the tools of her devotion. Here's where it gets complicated, where every modern instinct wants to simplify this into a narrative we can digest. Because every bone in your body, every neuron in your modern brain wants to say, this was oppression. This was patriarchal violence dressed up as religion. This was men forcing women to mutilate themselves and calling it holy. This was trauma wrapped in cosmic necessity. And maybe it was, maybe that's the truth, but the evidence doesn't entirely support that interpretation. Lady Cable ruled as Kalumti, a rank higher than her husband's. In the political hierarchy of the Maya world, she outranked him. She commanded armies while he administered the city. She made political decisions that her husband then implemented. Her name appears on more monuments than any male ruler of her era. When Spanish accounts describe these rituals, they note that the women performed them in private chambers where men were not permitted. The priestesses who assisted were female. The tradition was passed from older noble women to younger. Men performed their own bloodletting rituals from their tongues, from their earlobes, from their penises with stingray spines, but separately. This was a tradition maintained by women, for women, in service of cosmic order. The Maya didn't see this as degradation, they saw it as power, the ability to bridge the human and divine realms, to hold back cosmic collapse with your own body, to bleed not as a victim, but as a warrior whose battlefield was the space between worlds, to offer not just life which any warrior could do by dying, but the source of life itself. Male rulers could bleed, they could die in battle, they could have their hearts cut out on altar stones, but only women could bleed from the place where life originates. Only women could offer the gods not just blood, but the ritual wounding of the capacity to create future generations. It was, in their cosmology, the ultimate sacrifice. Not death, but the repeated injury of the source of life itself, done willingly, done proudly, done in full knowledge of what it cost. But here's what the Spanish records tried to erase, what the Maya themselves wrote out of their official histories, what archaeologists are only now beginning to uncover. Some women refused. In the decades before the Spanish arrived, when the Maya civilization was already fracturing from prolonged droughts and internecine warfare, when the cities were competing for dwindling resources and the cosmic order seemed to be collapsing, despite all the bloodletting, there are fragmentary accounts of noble women who declined the rituals, who questioned whether the gods really required this, who suggested that perhaps the universe would hold itself together without their suffering, who wondered aloud whether the droughts and the wars might have causes other than insufficient blood sacrifice. These women disappeared from the historical record. Their names were chiselled off monuments. Their tomb inscriptions were defaced, the glyphs hammered into illegibility. Their lineages were erased from the dynastic records. But in 2018, archaeologists working at the ruins of Calakmul found something extraordinary. A chamber that had been deliberately sealed, not for burial but for concealment. The entrance had been plastered over and painted to look like solid wall. Inside were murals showing a woman standing before a bloodletting altar. She's dressed in full royal regalia, jade pectorals, elaborate headdress, the symbols of high rank unmistakable. Her arms are crossed over her chest in a gesture that appears nowhere else in Maya iconography. The sacred rope lies on the ground before her, unbloodied, unused, and above her head, painted in Maya blue that has survived 1,000 years in the jungle humidity, are glyphs that translate roughly to, "She refused the letting. She said the gods would understand. She said her body was not the price of sunrise." Beneath the mural they found her skeleton, buried without jade, without offerings, without the elaborate tomb goods that would indicate her rank, but buried carefully, with respect, with her arms still crossed over her chest. As if even in death she was still refusing. The archaeologists spent weeks documenting that chamber. They took thousands of photographs. They made 3D scans. They analysed every pigment, every brushstroke, every glyph. And then, following protocols established by the Mexican government, they sealed it again. Because some discoveries are too dangerous, too controversial, too likely to be misunderstood or sensationalised or weaponised by people with agendas. The official report mentions a burial chamber, with wall paintings showing ritual scenes. Nothing more. The photographs remain in restricted archives. The 3D scans are classified. The full translation of the glyphs has never been published. But one of the archaeologists, shortly before retiring, gave an interview to a small academic journal. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with precision. "We found evidence," she said, "that suggests."